Senator Bernie Sanders is going after members of Congress for supporting a $778 billion Pentagon budget for the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, while those same members of Congress are refusing to pass Build Back Better. So now Sanders, who says he intends to vote against the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, went on the House floor to make a speech. I want to show you one video of that, some of what he said. Take a look.
All of this money is going to an agency, the Department of Defense, that continues to have massive cost overruns year after year, wasting enormous amounts of money, and is the only major governmental agency in the federal government not to successfully complete an independent audit. Now, isn't it remarkable how even as we end the longest war in our nation's history, the war in Afghanistan, concerns about the deficit and the national debt seem to melt away under the influence of the military-industrial complex. People sleeping out on the street, people dying because they don't have any health care, kids unable to get the early childhood education they need, not a problem. Can't afford to pay for those things. But somehow, when it comes to the defense budget and the needs of the military-industrial complex, we just cannot give them enough money. But that is not all, and I want the American people to know this, because I suspect many don't. It is very likely that in the defense bill, or attached to the defense bill, there will be a so-called competition bill. And this bill is a $250 billion bill that includes $52 billion in straight corporate welfare with no strings attached for a handful of extremely profitable microchip companies. Oh, and by the way, I should also mention that as part of the so-called competition bill, there is also a $10 billion handout to Jeff Bezos, one of the wealthiest people in our country, for space exploration. Combining these two pieces of legislation would push the price tag of the defense bill to over $1 trillion for 1 year. And I want people to remember that, because when we talk about Build Back Better, you talk about a 10-year bill.
So again, he drops a lot of facts in that. And look, let me also mention that when it comes to Build Back Better, a lot of the stuff in there that Bernie Sanders had been pushing for in that bill, when it was a $3 trillion, first a $6 trillion, then a $3 trillion bill, now it's 1.75, and whatever Joe Manchin decides he wants to cut it down to, even further, because apparently he has all the power in this government. Ridiculous. There was a lot of stuff in there that was supposed to help. Now, a lot of that stuff was taken out, and now one of the most expensive parts of that bill is corporate welfare. It's actually the second most expensive part of that bill is more corporate handouts, a tax cut. I think it's a SALT tax, actually. So it's going to affect 5% of the I should say the top 5% of taxpayers. So it is definitely a tax cut, and it is a handout. And of course, a lot of the rest of that bill gives money towards renewable energy companies. So there's handouts there. And so, I mean, again, what they're doing is that they're just basically handing out pork to everyone. Except, handing out money for the American people. But anyway, what Bernie Sanders is doing in the House, in the Senate floor, is actually calling out the hypocrisy of people like, for example, Joe Manchin and corporate Democrats. Now, they say that the NDAA is a priority. But yet, Joe Manchin does not think, and he disagrees with the Pentagon on this, ironically, that climate change is a priority. He doesn't think climate change is a priority. Now, it also is important to point out, Pentagon's, I think, the world's top polluter. So, they would know about climate change. They would know about the threats about climate change because, well, they are one of the big, drivers of it for their emissions. But no, Joe Manchin says, I'm not worried about climate change. Climate change what? Climate change? Climate change? No, not concerned about it at all. And I'm not concerned about, spending on regular people. I think we spent too much. Yes, we've spent too much. Inflation is too high, and the deficit, and all these different excuses as to why he will not support Build Back Better, which, by the way, a lot of the provisions in it, even especially the ones that were dropped, were incredibly popular in West Virginia. But no, I am so worried about the national debt. So I'm not going to spend money on you. I'm going to spend money on me. I'm going to spend money on my coal company. I'm going to, spend money on the donors. I don't want poor people getting this money. Not 1 cent. Not 1 cent. So here's the thing, right? So when it comes to giving money to corporations, when it comes to giving money and doing massive handouts, Congress has poured over $9 trillion into the Pentagon. They're the only agency that, as Bernie mentioned, has not passed an audit. There's so much waste. So much waste. But yet Joe Manchin has approved every single NDAA since 2011. And he voted on Wednesday to advance the 2022 Pentagon budget, which allocates additional money towards the defense contractors. There's no discussion about debt when we talk about this. There's never any discussion about debt. There's never any discussion about inflation or deficits when it comes to defense spending or corporate handouts or tax cuts. Now, there's more. Lindsay Kashgarian of the National Priorities Project also observed this. They said, over the past 10 years, the U.S. has handed over $3.4 trillion, or 3.7 in inflation-adjusted terms, to Pentagon contractors, big corporations, without any headline-making congressional negotiations. Just passes right through. For that money, the U.S. has gotten many copies of the supposedly cutting-edge military plane that has spontaneously caught fire at least 3 times. And there's some bang for the buck. Has heavily subsidized average CEO pay of $17.7 million at the top military contractors, and allowed corporations to rake in profits, even while they failed wildly in the effort to reconstruct Afghanistan. So what was that again about us not being able to afford paid leave, medical care for seniors, and free community college? Exactly. And again, speaking of costs, altogether, this is not just Afghanistan, this is militarism at home and abroad. The United States since 9/11 has spent $21 trillion. You want to find out where the debt is? What caused the debt? There it is. There it is. There's the debt. That's what we found. Look, and again, we got seniors, okay, with their teeth rotting out of their head because they can't afford dental care. Okay? We got people that can't afford glasses, they can't afford eye care. Okay? We got seniors that can't hear. We got $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. And guess what? 98% of borrowers are not ready to be able to resume payments. And yet, guess what? January 31st, that's when that's when they resume student loans. That's it. End of the end of the year. We got all these problems in this country, But whenever we try to fix them, Joe Manchin or some other corporate goon pops up and says, "Oh no, that thing? Oh, we can't afford that thing. No. Mm-mm. You know what we actually can't afford? Corporate politicians, corrupt politicians, and corporate welfare. Those are the things we can't afford. Okay? Almost everybody in Washington is on the take from private, from corporate donors, and the average American gets fucked over. That's what it is. We pay our taxes, and what do we get in return? We get nothing. Oh, we get an F-35 and bombs to make little Muslim kids into skeletons. That's what we get. We get a more, heavily armed and oppressive police state from this. We get Jeff Bezos being subsidized to run in a dick rocket. That's what we get. You know what I want with my tax money? I want healthcare. I want clean water. I want clean air. I want opportunity for our younger generations. I want infrastructure. I want childcare for parents so they can go to work if they want, or higher wages for people so they don't have to go to work as families. So one parent can stay home if they choose. That's what we want. Now, for one last point, inflation. Now, is inflation an issue? Absolutely. It is an issue. And it's up quite a bit. Well, good news. Build Back Better doesn't do anything to cause inflation, to add to the inflation, because it's all paid for already. It's already paid for. In fact, there are pay-fors that are literally built into the bill. And by the way, I have to make a correction here. It's rare. It's rare. Okay? I need to apologize to Larry Summers, of all people. Larry Summers. So why? It's because I misquoted him. Now, that's not because I wanted to misquote him, because all the articles that I've noticed in corporate media misquote him too. Leave out very important context. So Larry Summers, now he warned about inflation. Okay, he talked about inflation, and he does actually say that, hey, look, the giant COVID bill that did add to inflation. Now that COVID bill was stuffed with corporate welfare, and there was $1,400 checks, unemployment benefits, and some other good things, that were in there. And that's why I was like, well, we got to pass that, obviously, because there's stuff in there that help the regular American people, working class people. But it was also filled with so much corporate welfare, many, many handouts, billions of dollars. And that's part of where the inflation comes from. They're right when they say when you pump the market full of money, you're going to get inflation. Well, what do? We gave $6 trillion in liquidity to the banks. And lots and billions of dollars, like I said, in corporate welfare. Perhaps even trillions of dollars in corporate welfare. Now, what did they do with that money? Well, they didn't invest it back in your business. No, they went and bought back their own stocks. That's what happened. They bought their own stocks. They inflated their shareholder values, creating a bubble, and then awarded themselves massive, massive compensation bonuses. That's what they did with that money. And by the way, they still laid people off. They posted massive profits, and yet still raised prices, not because, of course, there was so much money in the market, by the way. That's not the only reason that we do have inflation, but it is certainly a part of it. The other reasons that we have inflation, of course, is we had COVID. We had a massive crisis with COVID-19, and now we have a supply chain crisis. The result, the so-called labor shortage, it's actually a shortage of good-paying jobs. People are not working for the shit jobs and the shit pay that we had before. That includes truckers. We need a lot of truckers, but guess what? Truckers are not getting paid well. They're not getting paid enough to justify their loads. So there's not enough truckers. Not enough truckers to work for these terrible wages. Not enough regular, people to work at the stores or work at the restaurants, because they're tired of taking terrible, terrible pay for terrible jobs. That's part of our supply chain crisis, a very big part. And the other part, gas prices, has to do with an OPEC, the OPEC plus. So super cartel of oil producing countries that have decided that they're going to raise prices by restricting the supply of oil. They're going to create scarcity in order to increase demand, or I should say at a time to increase prices at a time where there is increased demand for gasoline. Now, they don't want to do that just to make their money back from anything they might have lost during the pandemic when there was a slowdown on the consumption of oil and gas. Hey, you know what would be great? You know what would get us away from the cartels, OPEC, and their control? So we don't have to pay so much money at the pump? Get away from fossil fuels. Invest in alternative energy, green energy. Oh, but we can't do that because a literal coal baron is basically deciding the fate of any legislation that could come through the Senate. That's what's going on here. So just to understand what's happening here and why these things are happening and who is driving them. Because there are solutions that we could do today. And there are people that do not choose to do those solutions because they monetarily benefit from not doing anything. From you paying more at the pump, you paying more for groceries, and you paying more in general and getting paid less. That's the situation. That's the situation. Again, by the way, as I mentioned, I want to show you a clip here. This is Larry Summers talking about, this is Jake Tapper talking about inflation as it relates to Build Back Better. This is the quote that I really want to, apologize for taking it, for not knowing the context. Okay, so let's listen to Jake Tapper.
You talk about the Build Back Better Act, which is $1.75 trillion as a solution to this problem, but your predecessor under President Obama, Larry Summers, he pointed this week to the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that was passed earlier this year in March. He said that's a major reason behind the rising inflation, something he called at the time, quote, the least responsible macroeconomic policy we've had in the last 40 years. Is it possible that Americans are suffering now from high prices because the Biden administration overstimulated the economy with all of this money going into the economy?
So understand that he leaves out the context. Now, he said, Larry Summers said that, the coronavirus stimulus, helped lead to inflation. Now, again, this is a discussion on Build Back Better. So he uses that to try to say, that's why we shouldn't do Build Back Better. Now, Republicans are making the same argument, and so is Joe Manchin, saying, we've got so much inflation. If we do more government spending on Build Back Better, that's going to make things worse. Now, Larry Summers didn't actually say that. Larry Summers, again, pointed out, and this is the quote, here's what he said. He said Wednesday's report on inflation shows the problem is becoming more entrenched. It seems to me unlikely inflation will return to 2% target levels without strong monetary policy action or some kind of interference with economic growth. Summers attributes the persistent inflation to Biden's COVID relief package, but said he supports infrastructure and social spending bills. He said together they are smaller over 10 years than this past year's stimulus was over a single year, and in addition, they are substantially paid for. That was Larry Summers in context, the full quote, saying, yes, there is inflation, it is a problem, it is high, and we should do more social spending as a result. Did corporate media say that? Did Jake Tapper say that? No. Have Republicans, quoting Larry Summers, did they say that? No, not at all. Not at all. So I apologize to Larry Summers And I point at corporate media for not giving the full context of that quote. In all of the articles that I had read about this, that they had written, they said, they didn't say anything about him supporting Build Back Better and supporting social spending. So that's really important to point out. All right. And there's a reason. Corporate media doesn't want Build Back Better. They don't want to spend more money on us. They want more handouts for corporations. They only want money for the big donors. And guess what? Corporate media, what are? What are they? Well, they're corporations. They're corporations. And they have fiduciary responsibility to return maximum value to their shareholders. And so they're affected by tax rates as well. They're affected by corporate welfare. So that's the situation. They don't want to spend more money on us. And so they're going to lie about inflation. And they're going to push a narrative that we cannot do any social spending that helps regular people because of fears about inflation. And they're going to cover for Joe Manchin. And they're going to cover for Kirsten Sinema. They're going to cover for any of the corporate Democrats. And then, of course, they're going to go and attack progressives and blame progressives for inflation, for wanting to do things. And for, blocking. By the way, Bernie Sanders is joining other Democrats in blocking the NDAA. So now you have Elizabeth Warren, who voted no, Ed Markey, who voted no, and Cory Booker, who also voted no on passing the NDAA. Now, the House approved its version of the NDAA back in September. And big surprise, none of the corporate-backed House Democrats holding up reconciliation over concerns about its cost voted against the NDAA. So they're against spending for you, but for spending for the military-industrial complex, and all of the pork that's involved. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.